What if your whole life, your health, your mind, even your future, was already decided before you were even born? Imagine that this happened just because your family, many generations ago, only wanted to marry people with the same blood to keep their family line pure. For hundreds of years, royal families around the world made a strange and dangerous trade. They gave up healthy genes in exchange for keeping their power. They married cousins, uncles, and even siblings. The results were often very sad people with mental health problems, serious illness, and broken families. Today, we're re-looking at some of the most heartbreaking and shocking stories of history as most inbred women. And believe me, when we reach number 1, you'll be completely surprised. Let's begin with number 10, Isabella II of Spain. She ruled from 1833 to 1868, but her life was far from magical. In fact, it shows the dark side of royal family traditions. Isabella was born in 1830. Her father had wished for a son, but after a long wait, he finally got a daughter and decided to make her queen. At first, people were happy, but as she and her sister grew up, people started noticing something wasn't right. Their health was poor. And that's not surprising when you learn that Isabella's parents were uncle and niece. But that's just part of it. Her grandparents on one side were also her great-grandparents on the other. Her family tree looked more like a tangled knot than a real tree. At age 16, Isabella was married to her double second cousin. That means their families were connected not just once, but twice. She had 11 children, but sadly, only 5 survived. And it gets even more complicated. Many experts believe her husband wasn't the real father of the children who lived. Why? Because their marriage was cold, and some believe her husband had secrets he never spoke openly about. In the end, Isabella lost her crown and had to leave the throne, but her story shows the painful results of a family trapped in its own history. Number 9. Marie-Louise of Austria. Marie-Louise was born into one of the most inbred families in all of Europe. Her parents were double first cousins, which means they shared all 4 grandparents. In her royal family, marrying close relatives was totally normal, almost expected, but it also brought many problems. Marie-Louise had 12 siblings, but only 7 lived to be adults. The inbreeding in her family was so strong that she had only 4 unique great-grandparents. Normal people have 8. That kind of genetic match is something scientists today only see in tiny, closed-off communities. At age 18, Marie-Louise was married off to someone unexpected: Napoleon Bonaparte, the famous French emperor. He had been her father's enemy, but the marriage was meant to bring peace between their countries. Also, it was a way for Napoleon to have a son and secure his empire. For Marie-Louise, it was more than just a wedding. It was the weight of an entire empire placed on her young shoulders. Number 8. Lorraine Whittaker. Now we leave the castles behind and go to a quiet town in America. Lorraine Whittaker's story shows that the dangers of inbreeding aren't just part of old royal history. They still happen today. She was part of the Whittaker family, made famous in a modern documentary. The family became known as a real example of what happens when families marry within themselves for many generations without mixing with others. Lorraine is remembered as one of the most inbred people ever studied in today's world. But that's not the only reason she's on this list. She is also the mother of Timmy Whittaker, who many people believe is one of the most effective people alive today because of inbreeding. Their story, I sent meant to scare it. It's meant to remind us that these things don't only happen in royal families. In some quiet hidden places, this history keeps repeating. Lorraine Whittaker's story leaves behind old castles and brings us into something much more recent and just as tragic. Lorraine is the mother of Timmy Whittaker, a man who is often thought to be one of the most genetically affected people alive today. Their life is not just strange or sad. It's a reminder that inbreeding can still happen, even now. And when it does, it can cause deep and lasting pain. This isn't about princes or queens. This is about a normal family in a small American town. But generations of living in isolation and marrying within the family created serious genetic problems. The effects are clear and heartbreaking. Their story was shown in a well-known documentary, and it showed how inbreeding can hurt entire families, not just in the past, but right here in our time. Now we go back in time again to number 7, Maria the First of Portugal. Some people called her Maria the Pious because of her deep religious beliefs, but others believed a better name might be Maria the Troubled. She was born in 1734, and her life slowly became more and more difficult. Her mind began to struggle as she got older, and her family was full of very close marriages that likely caused problems for her and her children. Maria's parents, King Joseph I of Portugal and Maria Ana of Spain, were actually the 16th royal couple from Spain and Portugal to marry someone closely related to them. This wasn't an accident, it was tradition. Royals were expected to marry each other to keep the bloodline pure. But this tradition often led to illness, both physical and mental. When it was time for Maria to marry, she was under pressure to continue the same family pattern. So she married her own uncle. Yes, her father's brother. Sadly, this choice led to heartbreak. Many of her children didn't survive. Those who did live suffered from health problems, probably caused by the inbreeding. As she grew older, Maria's mind started to worsen. She became so unwell that she was eventually told she could no longer rule. They removed her from power and gave the throne to someone else. Maria's story didn't end in war or in battle. It ended with a queen who broke down because of the damage done by her family's choices. Number 6, Marie-Louise Elizabeth d'Orléans. Her life was full of sadness, starting from her very birth. Born into a royal family full of drama, her father had been forced to marry his cousin, who was actually the illegitimate daughter of King Louis, the 14th someone born outside of marriage. This weird family setup meant Marie-Louise was already carrying the heavy weight of royal expectations and inbreeding. She didn't get to choose her future. Instead, like many girls in her position, she was married off to another cousin, Prince Charles of Berry. They had 3 children, but none of them lived past childhood. Nobody knows for sure if it was the result of inbreeding or just bad luck, but either way, it was more loss added to her already difficult life. Heartbroken, Marie-Louise started drinking alcohol at a shockingly young age, only 14 years old, according to reports. It's hard to say if she did this to numb her pain or because she didn't know another way to escape. One thing is clear, though. She lived a life she never asked for, full of sadness and pressure. Her story is a powerful example of how royal families' choices could tear a person's life apart. Now at number 5, Princess Alexia of Greece. She was born in 1965 and is part of one of the last generations where royal families still married each other, just like their ancestors did. She had 4 siblings, and all of them came from a marriage between a king and a royal princess. On the outside, it looked like a fairy tale, but their family tree held secrets. Alexia's parents were Queen Anne-Marie of Denmark and King Constantine II of Greece, and they were closely related, not just once, but twice. They were second cousins and third cousins. That means their family lines had mixed more than one time in the past. Here is an example. One of Constantine's grandmothers was also the sister of his great-grandfather. That's how tangled and twisted the family lines had become. Anne-Marie's family had its own share of close connections, too. Even though her parents seemed to care deeply about each other, their close genetic connection passed down to their children, including Princess Alexia. That means she was slightly inbred, just like many other royals, including Britain's own Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, who were also related in multiple ways. So even in modern times, the long tradition of royal inbreeding still touches the lives of those born into old family lines. Princess Alexia's story showed us that the effects of inbreeding didn't just stay in the past. They even reached into modern royal families. Just like the British royals Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, who were also related. Alexia and her siblings were born from a royal couple whose family trees were crossed and tangled. Their love might have been real, but the genetic risks were still there, passed down quietly through generations. Now let's look at number 4, Maria Antonia of Austria. Not many people know her name today, but when it comes to inbreeding, she may have been even more affected than her better-known uncle, Charles II of Spain, the king many people think of when talking about royal inbreeding. But Maria Antonia's family tree wasn't really a tree. It was more like a circle made up of the same names over and over again. Her ancestors kept marrying their cousins, uncles, or nieces, all to keep power and land inside the family. The Habsburg family, which she was part of, was famous for this. And the result? Maria Antonia had a genetic makeup that scientists say was as inbred as a child born between two full siblings, and that's extremely rare and dangerous. Even though Charles II is often seen as the face of inbreeding's damage, Maria Antonia was even more extreme, and yet her story is nearly forgotten. But her DNA speaks loudly, proof of what can happen when family lines are repeated over and over with no new blood added in. Now let's travel way back in history to ancient Egypt with number 3, mummies 317 and 317b. We don't know these girls by name. We only know them from their small, carefully preserved bodies. But their story is full of sadness and tells us something important about how far royal inbreeding goes back. These 2 baby girls were most likely stillborn, born without life. They were the daughters of Pharaoh Tutankhamun and his wife Etizanamun, who lived around 1300 BCE. But here's what's shocking. Etizanamun wasn't just Tutankhamun's queen. She was also his half-sister. They both had the same father. And sadly, both of them were already products of many generations of family members marrying each other. That means their genes had become too closely matched. Tutankhamun himself had many health issues. He likely had a clubfoot, bone problems, and might have struggled to walk. These 2 daughters, the tiny mummies, were born when the genetic risks had reached their breaking point. They were weak, small, and showed signs of deformities. Their very short lives, maybe even lives that ended before they began, are painful reminders that even kings and queens, no matter how powerful or godlike, couldn't escape the damage caused by keeping bloodlines too pure. Now, leaving ancient times behind, we return to something shockingly modern at number 2, Kimberly from the cult case in Australia. This story is not about a queen, but it may be even more terrifying because it's real, recent, and happened far from any palace. Her real last name isn't used in public to protect the children involved. But Kimberly was part of what has become known as the cult family, a group of people from the Australian countryside who lived in extreme isolation for years. They practiced inbreeding across many generations, without much contact from the outside world. Finally, in the early 2000s, the truth came out. Police discovered shocking things: children who were confused about who their parents were, people who couldn't speak properly, and others with serious health and mental problems. The situation was called one of the worst cases of family inbreeding ever seen in the modern world. Kimberly was born into this group. Medical experts say she may be one of the most genetically affected individuals ever recorded, not because of royalty, but because of the complete lack of anyone outside the family tree. Her story reminds us that inbreeding isn't just about royalty and old traditions. It's about humans, and what can happen when a group becomes closed off and people stop questioning harmful choices. Kimberly's life is a powerful warning and a heartbreaking example of how far things can go when no one steps in to help. And now we've reached number 1, the woman who shows us just how far royal families were willing to go to keep power through bloodlines, Cleopatra the second Philopator. Forget the movie version of Cleopatra, the beautiful woman in gold, who falls in love with Julius Caesar or Mark Antony. That was Cleopatra VII, the last queen of ancient Egypt. But Cleopatra II came before her, and her real story is even more shocking. Cleopatra II was a ruler in the Ptolemaic dynasty, a royal family that came from Greece, not Egypt. Even though they ruled Egypt, their blood was fully Greek Macedonian. They were determined to keep it that way. That meant over and over, they married their own brothers, their nephews, and even their uncles and cousins. Cleopatra, too, was born into this system. Her parents were brother and sister. Her grandparents were also brother and sister. Almost everyone in her family had married close blood relatives, and her own siblings married each other before she ruled alone. Her family tree barely had any branches, just loops. She wasn't just ruling Egypt. She was the final result of generations of pure royal inbreeding. Her body carried the effects of all those choices, even if history doesn't tell us exactly how it affected her health. She was powerful, yes, but she also carried a heavy burden placed on her before she was even born. Even her name, Cleopatra, was taken from a Syrian princess. It was one of the very few signs that someone outside the family might have joined the bloodline at some point. But mostly, her family had kept their line closed off, trying to stay pure for power's sake. Cleopatra II shows us what happens when people believe that keeping things in the family is more important than health or well-being. She ruled a great kingdom, yet her whole life was built on choices made long before she could make her own. From famous queens to forgotten villages, from palaces to isolated towns, these stories all share something deep and disturbing. They show us how the desire for pure bloodlines, power, and family pride caused pain, sickness, and tragedy. These stories are not just about history, kings, or queens. They remind us that biology matters, that decisions made in the name of tradition or politics can shape lives in quiet but powerful ways. And that sometimes, the biggest dangers don't come from outside forces, but from the choices families make, generation after generation.